Everyone. Sophie shielded her eyes as she approached the glowing gates, afraid of what might happen if she focused too intently on the light. Her light leap home from school had made her head fuzzy, and leaping to Everglen had made it even worse. Or maybe it was the nerves. All the hairs on her arm were sticking straight up, and her knees knocked together as the gate swung open. Adeline, who'd been spending most days there, gave her a sad smile as she held out her hand. Sophie took it, leaning on her as they made the long trek to the house. Sophie Foster returns, Alvar said, appearing out of thin air from his spot on the steps outside the mansion. Welcome to the most miserable place on earth. She couldn't argue with that, especially with the raspy, eerie song ringing in the background. What's that song? My mom. Today, she's singing. Singing? Alvar sighed. My mom studied music with the dwarves. She thinks it'll bring my dad back. Just like making his favorite food should have done yesterday and showing him every picture we've ever taken the day before. It's hard to let go, Adeline whispered, wiping a tear. I'd better go check on her. Will you be okay? She asked Sophie. And Sophie nodded, even though she felt anything but okay. You came to see Fitz and Biana? Alvar asked, motioning for her to take the seat next to him. Yeah, if they'll see me. He shrugged. Everyone handles this stuff differently. My mom's trying to fix it. Biana's hiding and not talking to anyone. And Fitz is trying to figure out who's to blame. Me, she whispered, feeling tears burn her eyes when Alvar nodded. And Prentice, and the council. He's basically mad at the world. Sophie watched Alvar shoo away a fly that was buzzing around his face. She felt about as small and unwanted. Should I not go in then? No, you're here. You should see them. Maybe it'll help. Something has to. That left her no choice but to get up and head inside. But before she opened the door, she turned back to Alvar. How are you doing? He smoothed his hair and gave her a weak smile. It's one day at a time. Sophie had hoped Fitz and Biana would be separate so she could talk to them each alone. But she could hear them both in Everglen's gigantic kitchen and had no choice but to head there and face the firing squad. Biana froze when she saw her, turning into a Biana statue that didn't move, didn't blink, and barely breathed. That was way better than Fitz, though. He slammed his bottle of lushberry juice on the table as he stood up and snapped, What are you doing here? I just wanted to check on you guys and see if there's anything I could do. No, you've done enough. Thanks. The words stung, but she'd heard them before, and she'd been expecting them. She thought about telling them she might have found a way to fix Alden, but it wasn't right to get their hopes up until she knew for sure. So she went with the answer she'd practiced, reminding herself that she was there to help them. If you want to blame me, go ahead. Wow, I didn't realize I needed your permission, Fitz interrupted. Sophie ignored him, sticking to the script she'd rehearsed the whole walk there. I just want you to know that I know you're going through a lot, and if blaming me makes that easier for you, do it. You don't have to feel bad later or apologize. I understand. Oh, you understand? He laughed and glanced at Biana, but she was still in stunned statue mode. So you really get why I'm mad then? She didn't, but her best guess was, because I went to exile with him instead of you, and you think you would have changed something? No, because you went with him even though you were hiding the fact that your brain has problems. What? He stalked closer. You told me that day, when you did that weird thing with the blinking, you told me you were getting headaches, and you told me you were going to talk to Elwyn, but I asked Elwyn. He had no idea, not until you came back faded. And I'm guessing my dad didn't know either, did he? No, Sophie mumbled, trying to sort through the questions and memories and horrifying possibilities that were crashing around her head. Was he right? Did that make it worse? That's what I thought, Fitz growled. So you let him bring you, let him trust you with his life, and you never warned him something might be wrong. I told him I didn't want to do it, but he said it had to be me. Yeah, well, maybe he wouldn't have said that if he'd known you were damaged. The word felt like a slap in the face. Damaged. Was that what she was? I think that's enough, little brother, Alvar said, appearing in the room. Sophie's head was spinning so Too much for her to wonder how long he'd been there. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered if she was damaged. Fitz rolled his eyes and mumbled something about his brother being clueless as he grabbed Bianna's hand and dragged her out of the room. You okay? Alvar asked as Sophie fought back her tears. She tried to nod, but she was afraid if she moved she might crumple to the floor in a heap. Alvar moved closer and grabbed her shoulders. Hey, don't let what he said get to you. Even if he's right, which I doubt he is, it was guilt that broke my dad. Guilt for something that happened a long, long time ago, before you were even born. But she was the reason behind that, too. Alvar sighed. Look, I don't know how to make you believe me, but just remember, if you fall apart, then all of this was a waste. Breaking Prentice led us to you, and my dad always believed you were the key to everything. It's why he worked so hard to find you. So if you let the guilt break you, then everything he did was for nothing. Do you want that? No, Sophie whispered, repeating his words until they cleared the fog from her head. You're right. I won't let this break me. Good, he whispered back. He seemed to realize he was still holding her shoulders and let her go, dropping his arms to his sides. You should probably head home before my idiot brother starts any more drama. She nodded, but not because she was afraid of seeing Fitz. She needed to get home and come up with a plan. A real one this time. Alden gave up everything to save her. It was time she did the same for him. You get 2 chapters today. Chapter 42. Am I interrupting something? Grady asked, peeking through her doorway. Hold on. Need a sip of water. Sorry, guys. 42. Am I interrupting something? Grady asked, peeking through her doorway. Sophie scrambled to close her notebook as he made his way into her room. Nope, just doing homework. She's actually been listing the pros and cons of all the counselors, trying to figure out who was the best one to ask for help finding the journal. Something the Black Swan didn't want her to know was in there. Maybe it would tell her what they were really about. Grady sat on the edge of her bed. Adeline said things got a bit tense at Everglen today, or that was what Alvar told her. Sophie looked away. It's fine. I was expecting it. She figured he was going to give her some long lecture on patience and forgiveness, but all he said was, I'm sorry. Me too. He tugged at the collar of his cape. I really hate wearing these ridiculous clothes. He unfastened the pin securing the 2 ends around his neck and let it slide off his shoulders to the floor. Then he undid the laces on his jerkin and the top button of the collared shirt underneath. We all have to do things that are unpleasant sometimes, which is what I wanted to talk to you about. His eyes dropped to his hands. Bronte's planning something very difficult for your session tomorrow. Something the counselors and he says it's necessary, and there's a chance it won't even work. But I want you to take this with you, tomorrow in case you need it. He handed her a small vial filled with a milky white liquid. Dex and Kessler made it just for you. They said this one was especially hard to do without the limbium, but they found a way. It won't be quite as effective, but it should help you clear away any darkness. Darkness? Sophie could hear the tremble in her voice. He didn't clarify, just squeezed her shoulder and told her that Elwyn was there for her if she needed him, which only made her more nervous. What was Bronte going to do to her? Get some sleep, he told her as he grabbed his cape, and left her alone in her room. She stared at the tiny white bottle in her hands. Yeah, like she was ever going to be able to sleep now. Her inflicting session was at the very top floor of the Silver Tower, so high that Sophie lost count as she followed Master Leto. The room was bare except for a gleaming silver throne, which Bronte didn't even bother getting up from as she entered. Isn't it customary to curtsy when approaching a counselor? He asked as Sophie tried to figure out where to stand. Sorry, sir, Counselor Bronte. Sophie dipped an awkward curtsy as Bronte shook his pointy-eared head. Bronte turned to Master Leto. No matter what you hear, you would be wise not to investigate unless I call for you. Otherwise, I will not be responsible for your pain. Understood. Master Leto gave a quick bow before he turned to leave, and Sophie tried to convince herself she'd imagined the look of pity in his eyes. She dropped her satchel in the corner and leaned against the cold metal wall opposite Bronte. crossing her arms and giving him her best "you don't scare me" look. She had a feeling it wasn't very convincing, especially when he smiled. He folded his hands in his lap and leaned back in his throne. "Let's be honest, Miss Foster. You're here because your creators, in their infinite absurdity, decide to give an insolent, uneducated girl the ability to inflict pain. And I'm here to make sure you don't abuse your power." A dozen angry retorts pressed against her lips, but Sophie bit them back. She knew Bronte was pushing her, trying to get her to slip up so he'd have a reason to expel her. He scowled, probably annoyed she hadn't fallen for his trick. "I hear you're not a fan of this ability. Is that true?" "Yes," she admitted. "And why is that?" "Because it's scary and cruel," but all she said was, "because I don't like hurting people." "And I suppose you'd rather make everyone feel happy and loved." Was that possible? "Once again, your ignorance astounds me. Only negative emotions can be inflicted, Sophie. Fear and pain and hopelessness work best, though anger works too." He crossed his arms. "Well, go ahead then." "Go ahead what?" "What do you think?" "You want me to inflict on you? Do you see anyone else here?" "No." His eyes narrowed. "I won't ask you again, Sophie." Not sure what else to do, she closed her eyes and tried to muster up the right amount of rage. It was hard with no impetus. Bronte's sigh was so loud she was surprised it didn't shake the walls. "That's what I figured. I don't know." "Oh, no need for explanation. I'd expected nothing less. You have no knowledge or appreciation for your talent because it doesn't occur naturally. They just twisted your genes, giving you any powers they wanted, with no rhyme or reason. And now the council wants you to harness a power that your mind doesn't understand, which is why I've had to come up with a way to help you learn how to interpret it." Maybe she was imagining it, but she swore there was glee in his eyes as he lunged for her, pinning her against the wall. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying and failing to squirm away. "Something several of the counselors think I won't be able to do." He closed his eyes and his hands started to shake. "You're going to inflict on me?" He didn't reply, but the icy darkness that seeped into her head told her she was right. She shivered as the cold gnashed at her mind with sharp teeth, pressing and scraping and thrashing. But the pain wasn't unbearable. It didn't leave her doubled over on the floor, flailing and writhing like the other people she'd inflicted on. Bronte gasped for breath and the force changed, turning bright and hot. It melted the darkness, consuming everything it touched like fire. The harder Sophie tried to fight the heat, the hotter it burned. And just when she thought it couldn't get any worse, a trickle of the fire pushed deeper. Sophie screamed and felt her body collapse as the searing heat raged through her mind like an inferno. She thought about resisting, but she'd lost the will. What could she do? She was just a worthless, broken girl with no actual power. She should curl into a ball and give up. "I knew you weren't as strong as everyone thought." She gritted her teeth. She wasn't going to let him win. With the last of her strength, she dragged her shaking body to her satchel, forcing her eyes to focus as she fumbled for the vial Grady had given her. She spilled a few drops as she tore out the cork, but she managed to choke down the rest of the creamy liquid. Ice rushed through her veins and white clouds filled her head, lifting her up and away from everything. She couldn't feel, couldn't think, just lay there and soaked up the freedom of being so light, so calm, and so completely unburdened. She had no way to know how much time passed before the clouds melted like fog in the sunlight, but eventually her head cleared and she rolled to her side, noticing for the first time a figure leaning over her. His bright white teeth were all she could focus on as Bronte bent down and said, "I was right about you, and now everyone will know." "Told you should have named this place the Foster Center," Keefe announced as Elwyn handed Sophie a bottle of youth to drink. Master Leto had insisted on helping Sophie down the tower stairs, even though she told him she felt fine after she'd taken the elixir. He kept mumbling that she was far worse than she realized, and then when he brought her to Sandor, he demanded that Sandor rush her to the healing center. Not that Sandor needed an order to freak out, and become overprotective about her safety. At least it got her out of lunch detention, though she'd have to make it up the next day. And it gave her something else to think about besides Bronte's words, which were still swimming around in her head, making her queasy every time she tried to process them. What was he going to tell the council? I think I should start a pool to see who can guess how many times you'll end up here this year, Keith said, leaning back in his bed. I can make a fortune. Hey, you're a patient too, Sophie reminded him, pointing to his cloth-wrapped hand. Keith shrugged. It was easier than ditching. Elwyn handed Sophie a small vial filled with a teal elixir. The serum you took seemed like it did its job, but I want to be extra cautious, given what happened yesterday. Inflicting takes a pretty heavy toll. He didn't have to tell her. She'd never forget the pain, though the all-encompassing hopelessness that had swallowed her was worse. So what did you do? She asked Keith, to stop herself from thinking about it. Keith smirked. You're not the only one who can be mysterious. He shattered the bottle he was using to catch a tornado and cut his hand on the glass, Ellen answered for him. Whoa, way to kill all the fun, Keith complained as he unwrapped his hand and flexed his fingers. And it was more like a scratch. A scratch that needed 3 coats of wound wipe to seal it. And you get on me for being bad at elementalism? Sophie teased. Hey, miss, I've almost exploded the school. I am awesome at elementalism. I just couldn't concentrate today. Ellen turned to look at him. Everything okay? Keith glanced at Sophie. You tell me. I tried to stop by Everglen after dinner yesterday and the gnomes wouldn't let me in. Said the family wasn't accepting visitors and Fitz still won't answer my hails. Sophie became very interested in the edges of her cape. Come on, Fitz is my best friend. When she still didn't say anything, he added a quiet, please? She studied him, noticing a tiny dent between his brows. It was the closest Keith came to actually looking stressed. Elwyn must have noticed it too because he said, maybe we should tell him. The news will be public in a few days anyway. Are we really allowed to tell people? Sophie half hoped they weren't. She didn't feel like reliving all the sadness again. Plus, what if Keith blamed her just as much as Fitz did? Come on, Foster, how would you feel if your best friend had something major going on and no one would tell you what it was? I know, she mumbled. He was right. He deserved to know no matter what. But it's not good news. That's why I want to know. She sighed. Then she opened her mouth and tried to force the words out, but her voice had left her. Alden's mind is broken, Elwyn said when she couldn't. Keith blinked. You mean like he has a wound from when he cracked his skull, right? He turned back to Sophie. That's what he means, right? Sophie shook her head, fighting back tears as Elwyn explained what little he could about the council's mission and Alden's guilt about Prentice. Every new word made Keith turn paler. Are you okay? Elwyn asked, grabbing Keith's shoulder as he started to sway. He helped him lean down and put his head between his knees. After a series of deep breaths, Keith sat back up, wiping sweat off his brow. I can't. I mean, it's Alden. He's always been like... He didn't finish, but Sophie knew what he meant. Alden felt like a father to her, too. Keith sniffed and smudged away a tear. Sorry, he mumbled. I never thought. His voice cracked and he cleared his throat. And there's nothing anyone can do? Ellen sat next to him on the edge of the bed. Apparently not. All the telepaths who've checked him have said it can't be undone. Is that true? Keith asked Sophie. It took her a second to remember to nod. She might be clinging to a weak hope with both fists locked tight, but that was her secret. Keith's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything else as Elwyn checked his hand and gave him a blue serum to drink. When the chimes announced the end of lunch, Sophie slipped away before he could ask her any more difficult questions or decide that it was her fault. She tried to pay attention in multispecial studies. Lady Evera sounds prettier. Lady Evera was even lecturing on goblins, and she wouldn't have minded learning a few more Sandor facts, but her mind kept flashing back to Keith, pale and doubled over as he tried to process the news. If he'd taken it that hard, how much worse would it be when the whole school knew? Hey, Earth to Foster, Keith said, grabbing her arm as she made her way to study hall. Whoa, calm down, Gigantor, he added as Sandor moved to shove him away. I just need to talk to her for a second. I'll be watching closely, Sandor warned him. Sophie tried to stay calm as Keith pulled her to the side, but she had a feeling he was about to freak out on her just as much as Fitz had. What's up? I was going to ask you the same question. I know you too well, Foster. You obviously know something about Alden that you're not telling me. Something that's helping you stay so calm about this. I won't tell anyone if that's what you're worried about, but whatever you're planning, I want in. I want to fix Alden just as much as you do, and if we work together, it'll happen twice as fast. Actually, 3 times, since clearly I count for double. Keith, there's nothing anyone can do to fix a broken mind. I'm not talking about anyone. I'm talking about you. And I know you're up to something. I can feel it. He grabbed her hand, sucking in a slow breath as the crease between his brows relaxed. I can feel your hope. It's not much, but it's there. And there has to be a reason for it. Besides, you're going to need my help. Who knows the Vackers better than me? He did make a valid point. But trusting Keith? Please, Sophie, he whispered. I need to do something or I'm going to go crazy. Sophie sighed, looking at all the prodigies around them, many of whom were clearly eavesdropping. We can't talk about it here. Look at you, wanting to ditch study hall. Some people might say I'm rubbing off on you, which is an awesome compliment, by the way. I didn't mean now, but come to Havenfield after school. She walked away before she could change her mind. It's a date, Foster, Keith shouted, turning every head in the corridor and making her grit her teeth so hard her jaw hurt. Looking forward to it. That made one of them.